I never thought I'd be the woman sitting on her bathroom floor at 3 in the morning, staring at a phone screen until my eyes burned. But life has a way of turning you into a stranger overnight. They say the devil is in the details, but I found him in a hidden folder on my husband's iPhone. We had been married for 8 years, the kind of 8 years people use as a benchmark for stability. We have the house in the suburbs of North Carolina, the golden retriever that actually listened, and a Sunday morning routine involving blueberry pancakes and the New York Times crossword. Mark was the guy who remembered my coffee order, the guy who cried at our wedding, and the guy who told me every single day that I was his entire world. He was the rock, the steady hand, the person I trusted more than I trusted my own intuition. And that was my first mistake. You see, when you trust someone that completely, you stop looking for the cracks. You stop noticing when the stories don't quite line up, or when the late nights at the office start to feel a little too frequent. You just assume that the person you love is incapable of hurting you because you'd never dream of hurting them. But that night, the silence in our house felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Mark was fast asleep, his breathing rhythmic and peaceful, while I was wide awake, haunted by a feeling I couldn't name. It started with a notification, just a quick flash of light on his nightstand, a nameless app icon I didn't recognize. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that snooping was for insecure women in movies, not for someone like me. But the seed was planted, and once it started to grow, I couldn't stop it. I crept out of bed, my heart hammering against my ribs so loudly I was sure it would wake him. I took his phone into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the cold tile. I knew his passcode, of course. We never had secrets, or so I thought. When I finally found it, tucked away inside a utility folder labeled Work Expenses, my stomach dropped. It was an app called Hinge, but it wasn't the version everyone knows. It was tucked behind a calculator interface, a vaulted app designed for one thing only: deception. When I opened it, the world as I knew it simply ceased to exist. There he was, Mark, my Mark. His profile picture was a photo I had taken of him last summer at the Outer Banks, the one where he's laughing at the camera with the ocean behind him. His bio said he was single and looking for a connection that feels real. It said he was tired of the games and wanted someone who truly understood him. Every word felt like a physical blow. The messages were worse. There were dozens of them, stretching back months, maybe years. He wasn't just flirting. He was living an entire parallel life. He was telling women in Charlotte, in Raleigh, in Atlanta that he was a lonely architect looking for his soulmate. He was sending them the same compliments he sent me. He was using the same inside jokes, the same pet names, the same charm that had won me over a decade ago. It was a calculated, systematic betrayal. He had built a fortress of lies, and I had been living inside it, thinking it was a home. I scrolled through the threads, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. He told a woman named Sarah that he was divorced and that his ex-wife had cheated on him. He told a girl named Mia that he was moving to the city soon and couldn't wait to start over. He promised these women things he had already promised me. He promised them loyalty, he promised them a future, he promised them a love that was pure and honest. Every "I love you" he had said to me over the last 6 months flashed through my mind like a crime scene montage. Was any of it real? Was he thinking about Sarah while he was holding my hand at dinner? Was he messaging Mia from the bathroom while I was setting the table for our anniversary? The betrayal wasn't just about the physical acts he might have committed. It was the psychological erasure of our entire history. He had taken our life, our memories, and our shared language, and he had sold them to strangers for the price of a dopamine hit and a few fleeting moments of validation. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to lean over the sink. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back. My face was pale, my eyes were wide with a mixture of horror and grief, and I looked older, as if the last 10 minutes had aged me 10 years. I wanted to scream, to run into the bedroom and throw the phone at his face, to wake up the neighbors and tell them that the perfect Mark Henderson was a fraud. But I didn't. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my tears, and I realized that the man sleeping 10 feet away was a stranger. The level of detail in his lies was staggering. He had created entire backstories for himself that didn't involve me. He talked about his lonely apartment and his quiet weekends. He complained about missing having someone to cook for. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. He knew exactly what these women wanted to hear, because he knew exactly what I had wanted to hear. He was a predator of emotions, a collector of hearts who used honesty as a weapon. I remembered all the times he had comforted me when I was stressed about work, all the times he had told me I was the only woman for him. I remembered the way he looked at me when we bought this house, telling me it was the start of our legacy. It was all a script. He was an actor who had forgotten when the play ended.
As I sat there, I started to piece together the inconsistencies I had ignored. The late meetings that always seemed to happen on Thursdays, the way he started taking his phone into the shower, the subtle shift in his energy, a coldness that I had dismissed as work stress. I had been his biggest defender, his most loyal ally, and he had used that loyalty to hide in plain sight. I felt like a fool, a cliché, the wife who was always the last to know. But I wasn't going to be the victim. Not anymore. I started taking screenshots, my thumb moving rhythmically, capturing every lie, every promise, every betrayal. I sent them to my own email, one by one, a digital paper trail of the death of my marriage. I thought about our wedding day in Asheville. It was October, the leaves were turning gold and red, and the air was crisp. I remembered the way his voice cracked when he said his vows. I promised to be your anchor in the storm, he had said. Looking at those messages now, I realized he wasn't the anchor. He was the storm itself. He was the thing that was going to destroy everything I had built. I wondered if he ever felt a pang of guilt. When he came home and kissed me, did he taste the lies? When we made love, was he imagining one of them? The thought made my skin crawl. I felt tainted, as if his deception had left a film on me that I could never wash off. I stayed on that floor for hours, navigating the labyrinth of his double life. I found photos he had sent them, photos taken in our bedroom, in our kitchen, even a selfie of him in the suit I bought him for his promotion. He was using my life as a backdrop for his fantasies. By the time the sun started to peek through the blinds, I had over 200 screenshots. I had enough evidence to ruin him, but that didn't make me feel better.
It just made me feel empty. The person I loved didn't exist. He was a character created by a man I didn't know. I carefully put his phone back on the nightstand, making sure it was in the exact same spot. I got back into bed, my body stiff and cold, and I listened to him breathe. He moved in his sleep, reaching out to drape an arm over me, and I had to fight the urge to recoil. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the man I used to love to wake up, so I could begin the process of tearing his world apart. Watching him wake up was like watching a movie where I already knew the tragic ending. The sun was streaming through the sheer curtains of our bedroom in Charlotte, painting golden streaks across the duvet, and for a split second, everything looked normal. He groaned, stretched his arms out, and reached for me with that sleepy half smile that used to make my heart melt. "Morning, beautiful," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. I stayed perfectly still, my muscles locked, wondering how a human being could sound so sincere while harboring such a massive, blackened secret. I had spent the last 4 hours rehearsing my face, making sure my eyes didn't betray the firestorm raging inside me. I just nodded, muttered something about needing coffee, and slid out of bed before his skin could touch mine. I could feel his eyes on my back as I walked toward the ensuite. In the shower, I let the water run as hot as I could stand it, trying to scrub the feeling of his "morning beautiful" off my skin. It felt like a physical stain. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages. I saw the way he told Sarah he hadn't felt this alive in years. I saw the photo of him in our kitchen, the one where he was holding a glass of the expensive Cabernet we bought for our anniversary, telling Mia he was spending a quiet night alone thinking of her. I got dressed in a trance. I chose a sharp blazer and jeans, something that felt like armor. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already there, leaning against the granite island, scrolling through his phone, the same phone I had been haunting just hours before. He looked up and smiled, oblivious to the fact that his entire world was hanging by a single frayed thread. "You okay, Jen? You seem a little quiet this morning," he said, setting the phone face down on the counter. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I wanted to laugh, a high-pitched hysterical sound that would probably never stop once it started. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee and stared at the steam. "Just didn't sleep well," I lied, the words coming out surprisingly smooth. I realized then that I was becoming a liar too. The betrayal was forcing me into a role I never wanted to play. We sat there in the breakfast nook, the dog panting at our feet, and he started talking about his day. He had a big presentation at the firm. He might be stuck late again. He even had the audacity to ask if I wanted to do takeout from that Italian place I love on Friday night. I watched his mouth move, and all I could think about was how many times he had used those exact same words to cover his tracks. Every late night was a date. Every stressful meeting was a hookup or a deep dive into another woman's inbox. The day was a blur of functional dissociation. I went to work at the gallery, but I couldn't focus on the art. Every painting looked like a lie. Every brushstroke felt like a deception. I spent my lunch break in my car, staring at the screenshots on my own phone. I started cross-referencing the dates.
There was a Saturday in April when he told me he was helping his brother move. According to the messages, he was actually 3 towns over, at a boutique hotel with a woman named Chloe. He had sent her a message at 2:14 p.m. that day saying, "My wife thinks I'm lifting boxes. I'd much rather be lifting you." The sheer, casual cruelty of it made me grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. He didn't just cheat, he mocked me while doing it. He turned my trust into a punchline for his mistresses. I felt a cold, hard knot of anger begin to displace the grief. Grief is for things you lose. Anger is for things that are stolen from you. He had stolen my peace, my history, and my sense of safety. I wasn't just losing a husband, I was losing the last decade of my life, because it turned out none of it was what I thought it was. It was a Truman Show existence, and the walls were finally crashing down. I didn't go home right after work. I drove to a park near the lake and sat on a bench, watching the joggers and the families. I saw a young couple holding hands, whispering to each other, and I felt a profound sense of pity for them. I wanted to scream at the girl to run, to check his phone, to never trust the way he looks at her. I was becoming cynical, bitter, and hardened, and I hated him for that too. I realized that if I confronted him now, he would deny it. He'd say he was hacked, or that it was an old account he forgot to delete, or some other pathetic excuse. Mark was a professional-grade gaslighter. He had spent years making me feel like I was too sensitive or overthinking things whenever I questioned his schedule. No, I needed more than just screenshots of messages. I needed to see him in the act. I needed the kind of proof that left no room for his silver-tongued explanations. I checked the messages again. He had a date tonight. Not with Sarah or Mia, but with a new one, someone named Vanessa. They were supposed to meet at a cocktail bar downtown at 8 p.m. He had told me he'd be at the office until at least 10 p.m. finishing the blueprints for the new library project. I drove home, my heart cold. When I walked in, he was already getting ready. He was splashing on the cologne I bought him for Christmas, the one that smells like sandalwood and leather. He was wearing his favorite blue shirt, the one he knows makes his eyes pop. "Hey babe," he said, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. "I'm heading out. Don't wait up, okay? This deadline is killing me." He walked over and kissed my forehead. It was the most disgusting thing I had ever experienced. I felt the moisture of his lips on my skin, and I wanted to scream, but I just smiled and told him to work hard. I watched him walk out the door, heard his car start in the driveway, and listened as he drove away. I gave him a 10-minute head start. Then I changed into a dark hoodie and leggings, grabbed my spare set of keys, and headed to my car. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped, replaced by a terrifying, icy clarity. I wasn't the grieving wife anymore. I was a hunter. The bar was one of those trendy, dimly lit spots with overpriced drinks and velvet booths. I parked a block away and walked, keeping my head down. I slipped inside and found a spot in the shadows of the far end of the bar. It didn't take long to find him. He was sitting in a corner booth, the candlelight flickering against his face. He looked happy. He looked relaxed. And sitting across from him was a woman who looked nothing like me. She was younger, with long, dark hair and a laugh that carried across the room. I watched him lean in, his hand sliding across the table to cover hers. I saw him say something that made her blush, the same way he used to make me blush. I pulled out my phone and started recording.
I caught the way he looked at her, the way he laughed at her jokes, the way he ordered her favorite drink without even asking. It was a perfect, sickening display of his double life. But then, he did something that broke what was left of my heart. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. My breath hitched. He couldn't be. Not here, not now. He opened the box, and even from across the room, I could see the sparkle. It wasn't an engagement ring. It was a necklace, an expensive-looking diamond pendant. "For the most beautiful woman I know," he said, loud enough for me to hear over the low music. I remembered that necklace. I had seen the charge on our joint credit card statement 3 weeks ago. When I asked him about it, he told me it was a surprise for our anniversary. He was giving my anniversary gift to a stranger in a bar while I watched from the shadows. That was the moment the last flickering flame of love I had for him went out. It didn't just die, it was executed. I didn't burst out of the shadows. I didn't make a scene. I just turned around and walked out into the cool night air. I had everything I needed. The drive home was the longest 30 minutes of my life. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't even turn on the heat, despite the bite in the air. I just sat in the silence of my SUV, my hands gripping the leather steering wheel so hard my wrists ached. Every street lamp I passed felt like a spotlight on my own stupidity. I kept seeing that diamond necklace in my head. The way the light hit it, The way he'd smiled as he fastened it around her neck, that wasn't just jewelry. It was a physical manifestation of every mortgage payment, every shared grocery bill, and every retirement contribution we had made together. He was literally funding his infidelity with our future. When I pulled into our driveway, the house looked different. The craftsman-style windows, the porch swing we'd picked out together at a flea market in Georgia, the hydrangeas I'd spent all spring watering, it all looked like a movie set. It was a beautiful, hollow shell. I walked inside, and the dog greeted me with his usual wagging tail, blissfully unaware that his pack was about to be torn apart. I sat down at the kitchen island, the very spot where Mark had kissed my forehead only hours ago, and I opened my laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't have any tears left. I had something better, cold, calculated precision. I started by logging into our joint bank accounts. I had always been the one to handle the bills. Mark didn't have the head for numbers, or so he'd always joked. As I went through the statements with a fine-tooth comb, the pattern emerged like a bloodstain. The business dinners at five-star steakhouses in uptown Charlotte, the client gifts from Tiffany's, the ATM withdrawals in cities he supposedly visited for architecture conferences. It was thousands of dollars that should have been in our savings, or maybe going toward the kids we'd been talking about starting a family with next year. My stomach twisted at the thought. He had been looking me in the eye, talking about names and nurseries, while he was draining our lifeblood to impress women he met on a hidden app. I began downloading every statement, every receipt, every digital breadcrumb. I created a spreadsheet. I wanted it to be undeniable. I wanted a forensic map of his betrayal so detailed that no lawyer in the state could argue against it. I was no longer just a wife. I was a private investigator building a case against the man I had shared a bed with for nearly a decade. Around midnight, I heard his car pull into the driveway. My heart didn't race this time. It just went cold, like a stone in my chest. I heard the garage door rumble shut, the heavy thud of his boots on the mudroom floor, and the jingle of his keys as he tossed them in the bowl. He walked into the kitchen, looking flushed and happy, the scent of expensive bourbon and that sandalwood cologne trailing behind him like a toxic cloud. "You're still up?" he asked, his voice smooth and easy. He walked over to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and took a long swig. "Man, that meeting was a marathon. I think we finally nailed the design for the atrium, though. My boss is going to be thrilled." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his smile faltered just a fraction. "You okay, Jen? You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see my husband. I saw a stranger with a practiced smile. I saw a man who could lie as easily as he breathed. "I'm fine, Mark," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I was just looking over our finances, for tax season." He didn't even flinch. He just nodded, told me I was a lifesaver, and headed upstairs to get ready for bed. I stayed downstairs. I couldn't bear the thought of being in that room with him, listening to him brush his teeth and hum to himself as if he hadn't just spent the evening romancing another woman with my money. I slept on the sofa in the den, curled up under a throw blanket, watching the shadows of the trees dance on the walls. I didn't sleep, though. I spent the night planning. I knew I couldn't just leave. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he'd done. I wanted him to understand the gravity of the destruction he'd caused. Most people, when they find out their spouse is cheating, they blow up. They scream, they throw clothes out the window, they make a scene. But I knew Mark. If I did that, he'd find a way to make me look like the crazy one. He'd tell our friends and family that I'd lost it, that I was imagining things, that he was just trying to help a friend. No, I had to be smarter than that. I had to let him keep digging his own grave until it was deep enough that he could never climb out. The next morning, I was gone before he woke up. I spent the day at a coffee shop in a different part of town, meeting with a divorce attorney I'd found through a friend of a friend. Her name was Diane, and she was the kind of woman who looked like she ate lying husbands for breakfast. I showed her the screenshots. I showed her the spreadsheet. I showed her the video from the bar. She sat there in her glass-walled office, flipping through the pages of my ruined life, and then she looked up at me with a grim expression. "This is some of the most thorough documentation I've ever seen," she said. "He's been very busy, Jennifer, but North Carolina is an alienation of affection state. We have options here that other people don't." She explained the legalities, the ways we could freeze the accounts, the ways we could ensure he didn't walk away with a dime of the equity in the house. As she talked, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time since I'd found that app, I felt like I had some power back. I wasn't just a passenger in this wreck. I was the one holding the scissors to the safety belt. I went back home that evening and acted like nothing had changed. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I sat through dinner, listened to him talk about his day, and even laughed at one of his stupid jokes. It felt like I was wearing a mask that was slowly suffocating me. I watched him text under the table, his thumb flying across the screen, his face lit by the glow of the phone he thought I'd never see.
He was probably telling Vanessa how much he missed her already, or checking in on Sarah, or scouting for his next victim. I realized then that he wasn't just a cheater, he was an addict. He was addicted to the thrill of the hunt, the rush of the secret, the power of being able to maintain two completely different versions of himself. He looked at me and saw a safety net, a boring stability he could return to when the excitement of the other life wore off. He didn't love me. He loved the comfort I provided while he played his games. That night, while he was in the shower, I did something I'm not proud of, but something that felt necessary. I took his phone again. I knew he changed the passcode. He'd done it that morning, likely sensing a shift in the air. But I'd watched him enter it over dinner. 0812, our anniversary. The audacity of using our wedding date as the key to his vault of lies was almost impressive in its sociopathy. I opened the app, and I did something bold. I didn't just look. I started replying. To Vanessa, I sent, "I can't wait to see you again. My wife is away this weekend. Why don't you come over to the house? I want to show you the place I told you about." To Sarah, I sent, "I'm so sorry for being distant. I'm finally leaving her. It's over. Let's meet Friday to celebrate." I was setting the stage for a grand finale. I was bringing all his worlds into one room. I felt a surge of adrenaline that was almost intoxicating. He wanted a double life? Fine. I was going to give him a life that was twice as complicated as he ever imagined. I put the phone back, deleted the outgoing messages I'd sent so he wouldn't see them in the main thread, and walked out of the room. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the weekend. The weekend arrived with a heavy atmospheric stillness that felt like the breath before a scream. Mark was in high spirits, whistling as he packed a small leather duffel bag for what he called a last-minute site visit in Asheville. He kissed me on the cheek, lingering for a second too long as if trying to convince himself he was still the good guy. I watched from the kitchen window as his taillights disappeared down our quiet, oak-lined street. The moment he was gone, the mask I'd been wearing for days cracked and fell away. I didn't cry. I had work to do. I had spent the last 48 hours coordinating with precision that would have made a general proud. I had invited Vanessa to the house for 7 p.m., telling her through Mark's account that I was finally ready to show her my world. I had told Sarah to meet him at the same time, promising her the big talk about his supposed divorce. And then I had made one more call. I called his parents, the two people who worshipped him as the golden son, and told them we were having a surprise early anniversary dinner, and they absolutely had to be there by 6:45. By 6:30 p.m., the stage was set. I had ordered a massive spread of catering from the Italian place Mark loved, set the table with our wedding china, and lit candles throughout the downstairs. It looked like a celebration of a decade of love. His parents, Jim and Martha, arrived first. They were beaming, holding a bottle of expensive champagne and talking about how proud they were of the life we'd built. "You two are the gold standard, Jen," Jim said, patting my hand. "In a world where everyone quits, you guys stayed the course." I just smiled, a tight, painful movement of my lips, and checked my watch. At 6:55 p.m., a sleek white Audi pulled into the driveway. It was Vanessa. She walked up to the door looking radiant in a red silk dress, holding a gift bag. I opened the door before she could ring the bell. The look of pure, unadulterated confusion on her face when she saw me and then saw Mark's parents standing in the foyer behind me was a masterpiece. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice as sharp as a razor. She stammered, looking at the house number, then at me. I'm looking for Mark. He told me to come over. He said his wife was out of town." The silence that followed was deafening. Martha's glass of champagne hit the hardwood floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. Before Vanessa could even process the horror, another car pulled up. It was Sarah. She stepped out of her SUV, clutching a folder of divorce resources she'd printed out for him. The two women locked eyes on my porch, and the realization hit them like a physical blow. They weren't the only one. They weren't the soulmate. They were just two more names in a hidden folder. I stood there, the calm center of a brewing hurricane, as the accusations started to fly. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded. "I'm his girlfriend," Vanessa snapped, her voice trembling. "He's leaving his wife for me." I stepped back and gestured toward the living room. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and cold, "he's not leaving anyone. He's just late for dinner." And then, right on cue, Mark's car pulled into the driveway. He must have forgotten something, or maybe the guilt had actually touched him for once. He killed the engine and stepped out, his face falling as he saw the crowd on his front lawn. He saw Vanessa, he saw Sarah,
He saw his parents, whose faces were twisted in a mixture of shock and disgust. And finally, he saw me. He didn't try to run. He just stood there by his car, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his double, triple, quadruple life finally crushed him. The excuses started to tumble out of his mouth. The, "It's not what it looks like." The, "I can explain." The, "Jen, please." But I didn't let him finish. I walked down the porch steps, the screenshots I'd printed out gripped in my hand. I handed the stack to his father. I watched Jim's face turn from confusion to a deep, dark red as he read his son's words, saw the photos, and realized the monster he had raised. I turned back to Mark. "The locks are already being changed," I told him. "Your things are in the garage. The lawyer has the video from the bar, the bank statements, and the logs from your secret app. You told these women you wanted a life that felt real? Well, this is as real as it gets." He looked at the women he had manipulated, at the parents he had disappointed, and at the wife he had destroyed. And for the first time in 10 years, he had nothing to say. The silence was finally honest. I walked back into the house and closed the door, locking it with a satisfying click. I went into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of that expensive Cabernet, and sat down at the table. I could hear the shouting outside, Vanessa screaming at him, Sarah crying, his father's voice booming in disappointment. It was the sound of a hollow life collapsing. I looked around at the house we'd bought, the furniture we'd chosen, the gold standard life that had been nothing but a well-constructed lie. I felt a strange sense of peace. The betrayal was over. The secret was out. I was no longer the wife of a ghost. I was a woman standing on the ashes of her past, ready to build something that wasn't a facade. I picked up my phone, deleted the dating app screenshots one by one, and finally, for the first time in a week, I slept. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was shining through the windows, and for the first time in 8 years, the air in my home felt clean. I didn't know what came next, and for the first time in my life, I was perfectly fine with that.